Oh boy, I know it's been a long time since I have last posted a video, and let me reassure you all that I have been studying my ass off to bring you deep dive explanations into trans and mental health topics that are synthesizing information across multiple disciplines. And when I tell you that it's been an eye-opening experience, I mean I've been losing sleep over the impact that this information has had for me personally on my understanding of the world. And I really cannot wait to get this information out to you. Quality over quantity here on this channel. Welcome to Tea Time, my friends, a place where I muse about my gender transition experience and in the process aim to comfort and inspire others to a greater level of self-awareness. I am Artemis, and let me first start by saying that as a trans person, I am deeply concerned that the narrative the radical activists here in the US are pushing serves only to hurt the very hard fought understanding, acceptance, and normalcy that the LGBT community has gained. And this channel is quickly becoming a place where voices like mine can be heard and push back against their absolutely insane ideology, one aspect at a time. This video is going to be tackling the currently very popular emotional state of the woke, and that is being offended. And when I say woke, I mean those people here in the US who feel it necessary to control other people to keep their own emotions in check, and usually participate in some very hypocritical radical activism, speaking for others where it isn't warranted. Now, obviously, many people, not just the woke, have experienced the feeling of being offended. So not only am I going to dissect the emotional state itself so that you can understand why the woke experience it, but in understanding it, you can actually nearly eliminate it yourself from your own set of experiences, disengaging from the bear-baiting narcissism that is classic for the woke movement. And if you're anything like me, that is a priceless freedom that I wish more people knew, so I'm bringing it to you. Be forewarned, this took me a solid year of studying across multiple disciplines to get to this point. So,
hold on to your butts.
What if I told you that the source of being offended ultimately was just insecurity? Let's first begin by defining the word offended. Dictionary.com says that being offended is being resentful or annoyed by a perceived insult. Now, buried in these few words already is a loaded chamber. Let's start with being resentful. Embedded in resentment is the sense that you have been treated unjustly, that the actions of someone else are not only inescapable, remember that point, but are also preventing you from being happy. Many philosophers and psychotherapists have referred to this as ressentiment, and it's a deeply embedded defense mechanism to keep your sense of self intact, your ego, let's say, as Sigmund Freud would have termed it. While many first world nations no longer have to deal with the daily struggle of just trying to survive, this threat monitoring system has now turned its attention to social threats, and it treats them like a life or death struggle on a subconscious level. It's crucial to understand that your ego is constantly monitoring for things that it perceives as a threat to keep you safe. That's its entire goal. And it's even more crucial to understand that this monitoring system, unless you've had damn good therapy, is working from the experience and the perspective of a child. In that sense, many people are walking around as physical adults with the emotional maturity of a child. So remember that the feeling of resentment comes because you must first believe that you cannot escape the offending action. This comes from the very real experience of a child, that other people have great control over their everyday experience, every aspect of it, because they're held captive in that environment by dependency. There is no escape because if you run away, you likely won't survive. Once you become an adult, you can grow out of this limiting belief by actively recognizing that you now have control over your entire experience. And it could be just as simple as exiting the room where the offending action is taking place. But When I say that you have all the control, there are two major types: an internal locus of control and an external locus of control. While one is very emotionally mature, the other one is completely the opposite. But we'll come back to those two in a moment. Let's first finish with our definition of offense. So you're resentful and annoyed at a perceived insult. So, you know how it's said that the problem is not the problem is how you perceive the problem. Well, suppose someone says to me, "That shirt makes you look awful," or "You don't really look like a guy." Now, while that person's tact was terrible, they may very well have a point. Perhaps my shirt does look bad on me, and I could be making much better first impressions if I chose a different shirt. Perhaps I really don't look like a guy, and I might cause some people discomfort when meeting me for the first time when I don't measure up to expectations. Or perhaps their taste in clothing is terrible, and their ideas of what a guy are culturally different than my own. Maybe they're just having a crap day and they want to insult someone. My point here is that any of these reasons can be valid, yet none of these reasons have anything to do with me personally. And even if they did, I could choose to count them as constructive criticism and use them to improve myself, terrible delivery aside. So much ado is made about talking around people's egos, i.e., read that as political correctness or beating around the bush, etc., because anything perceived as a threat can result in the feeling of being offended. Then this sneaky little switch gets tripped in your brain, which puts you into fight or flight mode. And at that point, it's been well documented that your frontal brain, where all reason and logic reside, goes completely offline for a period of time because, well, do you really need to be able to discuss the meaning of predator-prey dynamics when your brain thinks you're about to be eaten? And by the way, if you can become self-aware enough to know what those things are that send you into fight or flight mode, aka that ever so famous word now, your trigger, and you take time to heal those triggers for yourself, you are well on your way to becoming a Zen master. Okay, so let's come back to this concept of internal versus external locus of control. Now that you know that being offended comes from your perception of threat and that you have all the control, now it's time to follow up with the difference between a fully emotionally mature person and a tyrant. There are two major categories when it comes to how people see control being enacted. You can choose to lay all the responsibility of action on yourself only, or you can lay the responsibility of action to others and manipulate them to gain control. You know the saying, there are two types of people: the person for whom life happens to, and the person for whom life happens for. In other words, it's the difference between saying, the rich who have all the money are the reason I'm poor, versus I am the reason I am not yet rich. And yes, I'm drawing a very deliberate comparison here to the woke mentality. And you can begin to see now why being offended is such a common state for this kind of person. As a side note, when people start using political terms like right and left, the meanings and contexts have changed so much over time that I think the message can get lost in translation, which is part of the reason why I'm using the word woke instead. Also, using such tired political terms can often fail to get out of the ruts that they have worn in the public consciousness, and I'm more attempting to communicate about a problematic mentality than a political movement or a political party. On that same note, using fresh words is something that the neo-Marxists are great at doing, because they know that as soon as they use the word communism, it shuts people off faster than Gilbert Gottfried reading a bill proposal.
Oh, shut up, you moron!
Okay, so those two types of control originate internally or externally. So this is why we call them internal and external locus. And a locus just means a point of origination. The kind of person who is often getting offended is seeing the point of control originating in other people. You'll often hear the expression, well, they made me XYZ emotion. And they will often find every excuse in the book for why they failed to achieve a certain result. They blame shift, putting that locus of control for their lives onto other people, and cannot accept personal responsibility for things or the idea that perhaps failure does not mean they are a worthless or terrible person. Taking the blame for something or failing translates deep in their brain that they are a horrible human being, i.e., that feelings are facts, and therefore any attempt to refute or reason with these points is translated as an attack on their very life. You often hear the expression, I feel personally attacked. Even if people are joking about that, they're onto something there. And it's sad that they just don't realize how deeply they're internalizing that. It may sound silly, but this completely explains the explosive reactions that you get when you calmly try to debate with a person in this mode of thinking. And ultimately, this state of existence is extremely fragile. And this is a place where another, often very nasty facet of ego sparing comes into play, which is narcissism. And I encourage you to look a bit further into this social contagion. I'm going to be doing more videos about this myself because it's rampant in our culture currently. And the rabbit hole goes much deeper than I can go into in this video. But be lightly informed for now that this is another layer of defense mechanism that the ego has, which is a bitch to break within yourself and impossible to do so for other people. There are two people on YouTube that you can look into, Dr. Les Carter and Dr. Ramani, who have great videos on narcissism. So, these narcissistic, tyrannical individuals lay the blame and the fix for their problems at other people's feet, which is an external locus of control, and will enact control by physically or emotionally manipulating others to keep their own emotions regulated. And it doesn't just come in one easily recognizable flavor like brute force. No. It comes in all forms. People-pleasing, obsessing, sending middlemen to do the communicating, aka flying monkeys if you know anything about narcissism, propaganda, blackmailing, withholding of attention, cold shouldering, and verbal and physical abuse alike.
Oh, what a nightmare.
And if you've seen yourself in any one of those behaviors described above, congratulations, you're a human. I had a great deal of these undesirable behaviors and mentalities myself, and I spent the better part of 2 years ripping those out from the roots. And it sucked. It was probably the hardest thing that I've ever had to do. And I would do it again. The emotional freedom and the mental clarity that it gave me. So, what do I have now that is different from the mentality of the woke? I see my locus of control as being internal. I generate my own emotions. People just notify me that they're there. I am responsible for my own health. And this includes all of the things that happened to me that I failed to foresee or that I had no input in controlling them being there in the first place. I am the reason that I make as much money that I do. I am responsible for knowing and respecting myself. Is it easier to blame somebody who cut me off in traffic for the reason why I'm pissy? How about blaming a microscopic thing for my suffering and attempting to control other people to keep myself safe from it? Is it easier to say that I'm struggling to make financial ends meet because my rent is too high? What about getting wound up because somebody didn't use the pronouns that you feel more comfortable with? It's so much easier to put that locus of control externally, and the woke give all of their power away by blaming and trying to control others. And in doing so become some of the most dangerous people you will ever hold company with, because at any time whenever that ressentiment strikes, it's guaranteed that instead of turning inward to solve that problem, they will look at you as the reason for their suffering. And a cornered, injured animal has nothing left to lose. I'll give a quick anecdote from a recent conversation that I had from a comment left on my channel, which I really enjoyed, which, by the way, shout out to Cakeface. This viewer had asked me how I had come to have such a lackadaisical attitude toward being misgendered, as opposed to so many other transgenders or transtrenders who seem to be very upset by it. And ultimately, the mechanisms are almost the same for what I just shared with you. I went through a therapy process called self-differentiation, which is something that I would recommend everybody do, and there is a channel run by a therapist named Jerry Wise, and this therapy helped me to separate my sense of self from everyone and everything around me. And then I began taking responsibility for that self. I got to know myself, I validated my own identity without needing other people to validate it for me with whatever terminology I was more comfortable with. Besides, trying to control other people's perceptions is insanely exhausting, and my energy is far better used on gaining other people's trusts rather than corralling my own insecurity. Not to mention, on another meta-level note here, I spent time thinking about why I was comfortable with one pronoun versus the other, and dissected it to such a point that I realized much of my discomfort had to do with sensing other people's discomfort or confusion about being unconventional to cultural norms. And once I let that go, man, that was like seeing the Matrix binary code just streaming before me. You see the other side of the veil and realize that so much of what you think is you really is just the programming that you've learned or inherited. No drugs were smoked, consumed, huffed, or injected for the making of this video. So, to sum all this up, to be offended means that you are interpreting a social or verbal situation as harmful to you and that you cannot escape it. I hope you've learned by now that no one can harm you verbally if you choose not to be harmed, and you always have an escape. The choices and the escape may not be easy, but life is ultimately full of difficulties, and how you come out is completely up to you. In accepting personal responsibility comes great freedom and empowerment, but choosing to do so in all aspects is truly one of the hardest things to do for many people.